Welcome to this next episode of ASAP Conversations. The Asia Safe Abortion Partnership has been reaching out to its members, partners, and other key stakeholders across the region and through various constituencies and communities in order to create a sense of solidarity and to recognize the universality of the issues we are all facing under the current global pandemic, but also to ensure that certain voices which are either underrepresented or completely missing from global political discourse are recognized and heard. And it is from this perspective that we've been reaching out to so many of our partners during this situation. So I'm very pleased to have with us here today Masooma, who's been very active in the work around female genital mutilation. And I would like to request her to introduce herself and talk a little bit about her work. Welcome, Masooma.
Thank you so much, Suchitra. Pleasure to be here in this virtual meeting. My name is Masooma, and I work in the space of female genital mutilation. So I founded an organization called We Speak Out, and primarily the issue of female genital mutilation is virtually got no recognition in India. As a practice, it exists, and it's been there for centuries, literally. But there is no acceptance of the practice. There is no political acceptance of the practice. Socially, people, apart from the community members, do not really know that something like this exists. And primarily, it's a silent practice, and it's a secret practice. So the work I do is within the community, as well as outside with the government, as well as with the legal system, and to bring to the fore this issue and to find ways and means to eliminate the practice in India.
Right. Thank you so much. It's really a very challenging work that you've undertaken. Could you elaborate a little bit for our audience who doesn't know exactly what a female genital mutilation involves? And there is a lot of conversation which says it should actually be called circumcision, and it's kind of a political labeling to call it mutilation. So if you could just explain that to those who are listening.
Sure. So currently at this point in history, the world refers to this practice as female genital mutilation. It's not a practice which is confined to India. It's actually a global practice. It exists in the whole of Africa. It exists in continents of America, Australia, Asia, in Europe. So pretty much in every part of the world, the practice exists. And uniformly, it's termed as female genital mutilation. I'll in a bit explain to you what female genital mutilation is, but let's first tackle this issue of terminology because it's a very important issue. So in different communities, it's known by different names. Like for instance, in my community, which is the Bora community, it is known as khubs. And in English, it's called circumcision. But the colloquial word is khubs. In Indonesia, where the practice exists, it's known as kitna. In different parts of the Arab world, in Africa, there are different terms which are used for the practice. And to kind of give it a unified name, the World Health Organization kind of came out with this term, female genital mutilation, FGM, about 20 years ago. So earlier it was referred to as circumcision. The problem with circumcision, use of the word circumcision, was it was confused with male circumcision. And to make it a very distinct and separate issue, the word female genital mutilation came into being. But still the point is that there is a lot of haggling which happens over the use of the word. So I think it's best to define what it is. So you may call it whatever, a rose by any other name, it will smell just as sweet. So similarly, you can call whatever you want. You want to call it circumcision, call it circumcision. You want to call it khubs, call it khubs. The point is the nature of the practice is what we are concerned about. And as far as female genital mutilation is concerned, there is a very comprehensive definition by the World Health Organization, and which very clearly says any alteration of the genital parts of a girl child for non-medical reasons is female genital mutilation. Furthermore, the definition talks about the various types of FGM which are practiced. So you have 4 types: type 1, 2, 3, 4. One is the mildest form because it's just uh, it's the cutting of the tip of the clitoral hood of the girl. It's not even the tip; it's the cutting of the clitoral hood of the girl. 2 involves the cutting of the labia minora and majora as well. Type 3 involves cutting all the external genitalia and sewing up the vaginal opening, except for a part which remains open, which is for urinating. And type 4 is any kind of incision, nick, prick of the genital parts of the child. So it's a very clear, comprehensive definition, which has got 4 parts. Now, what the kind of practice which happens in India, in my community, is type 1, which is the cutting of the clitoral hood of the girl child. Now, uh, the cutting of if anyone has any idea of the female anatomy and the female genital anatomy, the clitoris itself is a very, very tiny part, and the clitoral hood is even so more tiny. And the manner in which this part gets cut in India is either through a midwife or sometimes through a medical practitioner. And it's either done with a blade or a knife. And the way in which it is done, inevitably, in 9 out of 10 cases, along with the clitoral hood, a part of the clitoris also gets cut. A little about the clitoris. The clitoris is the only part in the female anatomy which is for sexual pleasure. It is an extremely sensitive part, which is a bundle of nerve endings. There are some 7,000 nerve endings on there. And actually, the clitoral hood is to protect the clitoris because it's such a super, super, super sensitive part. It's like we have an eyelid to protect the eye. Similarly, the clitoral hood is to protect the clitoris. And by cutting the clitoral hood, which is a practice in my community, you're exposing this very, very sensitive nerve endings of the clitoris to exposure and a lot of pain and a lot of physical and sexual problems for women.
Right. I mean, this is really absolutely, heartrending description of what women and girls have been suffering. Is there any what is the justification for doing this? What is the rationale behind this?
So it's interesting. The rationale across the board, across countries, is primarily to curb sexual desire within a girl. And the reason being that when a girl grows, she becomes an adolescent, which grows into a woman, she should not experience one, sexual pleasure, 2, she should not have premarital sex, and she should not have extramarital affairs. So basically, it's a patriarchal form of control of a woman and her sexuality, so that she's preserved and protected for this man who's going to be a husband. Yeah, so it's that across the board. And that is why, if you see, the entire genesis of the practice is the attack is on the clitoris. The mainstay of the practice is the clitoris.
So the way I see it, actually, the work that ASAP has been doing around safe abortion rights advocacy, locating it within the gender and rights paradigm, it's actually just one end of the spectrum, because here you're trying to prevent the girl from feeling any sexual pleasure. And the patriarchal systems which reduce access to abortion, safe abortion, are trying to control her sexuality at the other end. If there isn't enough of a fear of this unwanted pregnancy, which is then going to result in social punishments, how are you going to control this woman's sexuality? So it's really incredible and shocking how scared a certain system is of women's sexuality, whether it is in terms of pleasure or in terms of consent and being able to have partners. So what do you think causes this fear of women's sexuality? What is it that our cultures or the patriarchy is really afraid of?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and what you say is so totally true. because ultimately, along with sexual pleasure, you are controlling her, her rights to reproduction, and the deep-seated fear being that if and when she conceives, it has to be of the husband. The whole control of her reproductive function and sexual pleasure, which is kind of merged together somewhere along the line. And and the origins of this practice, at least if you see female genital mutilation, is literally thousands of years. And in fact, the practice predates Islam and Christianity. And it existed in tribal Arab and Africa. And it was a way in which, in feudal communities, in a way in which you could control a woman, you know. So something like in medieval Europe, you had chastity belts to control a woman. So here you actually had a physical way of doing it, but actually just attacking her clitoris.
Right.
So that's the whole thing about the patriarchy of it, and it's actually a horrific way to do it.
Absolutely, absolutely. So I must, I don't know whether you're aware, but I'm a practicing gynecologist, and I did work in the University College London for a few years, during which time we saw a lot of refugee women from Sudan, who used to have, the female genital mutilation done of a far more severe degree than the one you're describing. And their
Right.
labia were almost completely shut. And I remember the first time I encountered this woman, and she said it takes her about half an hour just to pass urine because there was such a small opening. And
Yeah.
she was menstruating for pretty much half the month because it just took that much time for the blood to come out. And it was absolutely unbelievable that someone could inflict this kind of
Yeah.
trauma on someone, particularly when they are girls. I believe it happens when girls are as young as 5 or 8 years old. And I was then unpleasantly shocked to find that some gynecologists or doctors are actually involved in this practice. And the explanation being given is that that makes it kind of safer in some way, rather than having a midwife using maybe a rusted or a used blade. So what is your perception on this? Is it the practice as it is currently in our country? Is it being facilitated by medical professionals?
Uh, yeah. So the new trend, which is there, especially in the cities. So in cities like Mumbai, probably Ahmedabad, Udaipur, Pune, Surat, which one would call urban tier 1, 2, 3 cities. There is a move towards what we call medicalizing the practice, where you kind of go into these sanitized conditions,
Yeah.
clinic or a doctor's clinic or a nursing home, and kind of do it. Uh, but the point is fundamentally, it doesn't take away from the reason behind the practice. I mean, whether you do it in a sanitized way or you do it in a way with a blade or a knife with a midwife, the point is you are attacking the woman and her body, and you are impacting her bodily integrity with the intention of curbing her sexual desire. So that remains. So
Absolutely.
I think this whole theory of let's do it in a nice way doesn't make any sense, and there should be a ban to it. And as you is described about Sudanese women, and of course that is type 3, which is called infibulation, which is the worst form and which often causes death also. And even for that matter, any other type of FGM, whether it's type 1, 2, 3, 4, there is something which is basically inhuman about it. And it basically violates something so integral to us as humanity and our human rights, that there is no place for this bad practice in our
Yeah.
world today.
No, I absolutely agree with you. No, the purpose of my question was to ask whether advocacy needs to be done even with the medical professionals, because I myself have come across some gynecologists who not only do but also advertise hymenoplasty, so you can be a virgin again, or
Right.
tightening of the vagina again to increase male sexual pleasure. So I wonder, who are all the key stakeholders that one needs to really work with. And maybe if you could talk a little bit about, so as you said, the practice which is happening in India or in your community is of a less severe type. But I'm sure there are still some psychosexual ramifications, right? Long-term impact of these practices on the girls as they grow up.
Yeah, I will not really use the word less harmful because I think it's as harmful.
Right.
Yes,
Absolutely.
I do agree that there are a huge amount of psychosexual implications to this. The thing, and I also agree with the point you made that, you have to take into your ambit as a part of medical ethics that, a doctor or a nurse performing this doesn't really take away from anything, and one needs to do that. Because for one, it is you're doing it to a child. There is absolutely no question of a consent, and it's actually a form of child abuse. In You
There's no
cut it
health
off.
benefit, right? There's no health benefit. So there's no
Absolutely no
benefit
health
for a
benefit.
medical person.
Absolutely. So
Yeah.
there is a need for medical practice, and you're right. There are many doctors and gynecologists who do perform this practice. In fact, one of the biggest cases in the world on FGM, there are very few cases actually which go to court for FGM, and one of the biggest cases in the world today is a case in America which involves a medical practitioner, a doctor, Dr. Nagarwala, and she was accused in a court in Detroit of performing this practice in a clinic out there to hundreds of girls.
Wow.
So there is need to act at multiple levels and working with medical bodies and getting them to kind of
Absolutely.
uh, get doctors to say no to this is extremely important.
Right.
Definitely. Yeah.
So could you tell us a little bit more about the work you're doing through your organization? Who are the key stakeholders you've been working with? What kind of successes you've had? What are the challenges?
So primarily we work at two levels. One is at the level of the community. Now the nature of the practice is, as I told you earlier, it's secret. So very few people really knew about this till we kind of came out in the public and announced it and said, okay, this is what happens to us. People really didn't know that this was a rampant practice. And the research which we've done shows that as of even now, 75 to 80% of the girls in our community are cut. So it's a huge statistic, and it continues unabated in an extremely secretive manner. There is a huge amount of ignorance which is there. So it's like a tradition which carries from grandmother to mother to daughter, with literally very few people beyond that circuit knowing about it. So if you have a brother in the house, he might not know about it. Many a times the fathers don't know about it, leave alone anybody else. So because of the nature of secrecy, uh, people don't even understand what are the implications of this on the body of the child, on the psychosexually, and later on when she becomes a adult, how is it going to impact her and married life and her future. So there is an increasing need for awareness within the community, and this has to be done extremely sensitive because it's a very sensitive conversation to be had. So that is one level of the work which we do, literally one-to-one conversations with men and women and young girls as well, uh, on the subject, basically trying to make them understand so that they make an informed choice. I mean, tomorrow, if you have a 7-year-old, 6-year-old girl, you should think about the consequences before just going ahead and doing it because your mother or mother-in-law is telling you to do it. You know, so that is at one level. The other level of our work involves working with, uh, you know, uh, for legal advocacy. Because at this point in time, we do not have a law which bans FGM. Now, there are laws in India where the issue of genital cutting could be taken up. You have the IPC where there's grievous hurt, section 326 talks about causing grievous hurt. You have with an instrument, a knife or something. Then you have POXO, protection of children, where you have section 5A. So anything, there may not be sexual intent, but causing harm to the genital parts of a child. But the point is that these laws exist and have existed, yet the practice continues. The practice has not stopped. In fact, it's openly propagated at times. So there is need for a law which clearly says that this is a criminal act and you have to stop it. So at least the women who want to stop doing it
Right.
have the backing of the law.
Absolutely.
you know and the propagation of it has to stop, and the education has to start. So there is a need for a comprehensive law which looks at all aspects of this. And of course, there are instances of physical and psychological harm which have gone beyond repair. In fact, we had a case 2 years back in Surat of a botched up performance of cutting. And there was this 6-year-old child who was cut badly, and she bled through the night. And the mother didn't know what to do. She kept changing bed sheets. The child did not stop bleeding. And then she called up the cutter, and the cutter initially told her, put soframycin and it'll get done. The bleeding will stop. The bleeding didn't stop. Finally, the cutter got scared and she said, take her to a doctor. They took her to a hospital. The hospital saw a child bleeding from the genitals, and they immediately thought it's rape. And they said they are not going to admit the child. And then finally, she was through a contact with a social worker. This child was taken to another hospital where she was sewn up. But the kind of trauma this child has gone through is going to stay with her for life. You know,
Yeah,
so there is need for, yes, we need the support and the backing of a law. I'm not saying a law is going to solve our problem. I'm not saying a law is going to end FGM, but that backing of a law is needed, to kind of take forward our advocacy work.
And it's not as though we haven't had laws which have, required, as you said, a legal intervention to bring about a social change. For example, say the practice of sati, or child marriages, or even the practice of dowry. They have all needed laws, as you said quite rightly, as a backing to support those who want to be able to challenge these traditional practices. So what do you see as the way forward in the work you're doing? Are there any positives? Is the younger generation more receptive to this information?
Definitely. I think that's a huge positive. The young are more receptive. They understand, they're willing to engage, they're willing to question and challenge the practices. So there lies hope within that. At the same time, I would like to say that, we are fighting against three very big institutions, literally. One is patriarchy. We are fighting against the political system, which is right now not supporting us. And we are fighting against religion. Because the whole practice, which is actually a traditional practice, has been given a religious color.
Right. You're absolutely right. It's kind of like the unholy trinity of our development work. No matter, when you dig in deeper into any of the work we are dealing with, including, as I said, safe abortion issues, any of the other sexual and reproductive right issues, you always come up against these three sort of intersectional problems. And it is very challenging, I'm sure. But we are really grateful that people like you are speaking out, because this year as ASAP, again, one of the things which is our themes for this year is to speak truth to power. So it's important to recognize who has the power. And I think an important factor in what you just said is, besides these three, the politics, the religion, and patriarchy, I think it's the young people who are going to be the next power. So let us really hope that the work you are doing and the work we are doing will be taken forward by the next generation. And on that positive note, I would like to conclude this interview, and thank you very much for your time. And thank you very much for doing this very important work. And I do hope that in the future, we could collaborate, and when we are able to have in-person meetings, we can, have you over to speak to some of our youth champions. So thank you once again, Masooma, for joining us.
Thank you so much, Suchitra. It's a pleasure.
So I'm going to just pause the recording now.